We are holding on Yud Zayin Amid Base, the 17b3 in the Art Scroll, and we're going back into Hilchos Shabbos the last few weeks with Tumah Mitahara, the Gzeiros, Shmona Esidorim, and today, Baruch Hashem, we're going back to Hilchos Shabbos, and this Mishnah deals with what's known as Shvisas Kelim or Shvitat Kelim, which is, I know I have to keep Shabbos. I know I have to make my animals keep Shabbos, my children keep Shabbos, but what about my kelim? What about my utensils, my vessels, my stuff that I have? Do they have to keep Shabbat, or is there no such din? So there is a machloket. This Mishnah brings us of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai is of the opinion there is something known as shvitat kelim. There is requirement that your utensils, your vessels, your machinery, whatever it is, needs to rest on Shabbat. Whereas Bet Hillel is of the opinion that there is no Shvitat Kelim required. There's no such thing as you have to require your machinery and your vessels to rest on Shabbat. So let us begin with the different cases that the Mishnah brings. Bet Shammai Omrim. Bet Shammai says, "En shorin dayo v'samanim v'chashinin." We may not soak ink, dyes, or vetch in water. So what is this? In order to make a dye, in order to make an ink, they would take certain amount of soot and other type of particles, black stuff, and then they would put water on it, and then it would become one big substance. And then they would dry it out, and then they would use that to re-put liquid, reconstitute it, and then they would make ink from there. So the process of putting the soot in the water, in the keli, and put the soot in the water, but Shammai says you cannot do that. Same thing with a dye. You would take the things that have the color and soak it into water, and then the color would go into the water. Also, what happens there is that it becomes one big mass. Or vetch. Vetch is charshinin. This is the food you gave the animals. And the way to make it edible for the animals, you have to soak it in the water. And then it becomes into one mass. When we keep saying it becomes into one mass, that means it's doing the malacha of lush. The malacha of lush is making dough, kneading. Okay? Dough becomes, when you put water with flour, you make a dough, right? So that is lush. So here, this is the same halacha. I put the ink, the dye, the vetch into the water, and it's in the keli. And if I'm going to keep it on Shabbat, it's going to turn into a doughy-like substance. And he did the malacha of dash. Your keli is doing the malacha, so you're not allowed to do that. Unless it has enough time to finish its job during the day before it turns Shabbat. So Bet Shammai says, can I let my keli make lush to knead this thing? I have to either finish it before Shabbat or I can't do it. Bet Hillel matirin, but Bet Hillel allows it. Right before dark, right before nightfall on Shabbat. It's still Friday. I throw in the stuff, put it in the water, and let my kelim take care of the business over here. Second case, Bet Shammai umrim. We may not place bundles of flax into the oven. So they would take flax, pishtan, there's linen, flax, and they would put it into the oven in order to bleach it, in order to make it white. And the fire was on, right, in order to do this. So Bet Shammai says, listen, you cannot do this. Erev Shabbat, unless you can whiten it before nightfall. Because you cannot let your kalim do it on Shabbat. And you cannot place wool in the dyer's vat, right? So you cannot take the wool and put it in the vat, in the pot that you're going to put the dye in, and you're going to cook it so it could go inside. Unless it can absorb the color while it is still day, because I cannot have my kalim do work for me on Shabbat. According to Bet Shammai, Uvet Hillel matirin, and Bet Hillel he says it is permissible. The difference in the case before and the case now, that earlier cases didn't have a fire involved, didn't have the possibility of having to do with the stoking the coals. But this case did. They both have fire on it. So even in the case of fire, Bet Hillel says that matirin, let your kalim do it. It's not your business. The kalim don't have no business of resting. Third case, Bet Shammai Omrim. Bet Shammai says, "Ein porsim mitzudot haya ve'afot b'dagim." We may not spread traps for beasts, birds, or fish. Ela kedei sheyotzodu mib'od yom, unless there is sufficient time for them to be trapped while it's yet day. According to Bet Shammai, I cannot set traps, and the trap is going to work automatically. Right here, the difference is in the other two cases, it was just left inside there. Here, my trap is actually making an action because the way traps work, the beer goes into the net, and then the whole thing, moves around. So Bet Shammai says, unless it all happens on what's it called, on Friday. Uvet Hillel matirin, but Bet Hillel is matir. Now, what does it mean? According to Bet Shammai, I can put out the trap on Friday if it can be trapped on Friday. How do I know for sure it's going to be trapped on Friday? So, what does it mean that it's going to be trapped on Friday? So, the Tosafot brings from the Yerushalmi has to have two things. The trap has to be placed in a place that there is a lot of animals, so it's very likely that someone's going to go into the trap, and it only has the space for one or two animals. Even if it gets trapped, it'll work right away, and therefore the trap is done. In such a case where you have a lot of animals there, and you have that only fits one animal, so then that's a trap you're allowed to put early Friday, because it'll definitely work before Shabbat. But Hillel lets you put it even before sunset, and let it do the trapping on Shabbat. Another area of dispute: Bet Shammai Omrim, Ein Mochrin Lenochri, Ve'en To'anin Imo, Ve'en Magbihin Alav, El Kadesh Yagil Makom Karov. According to Bet Shammai, you cannot sell stuff to the goy right before Shabbat, Erev Shabbat, unless you're giving him enough time to get home. Why? People are going to see you're loading with him, you're selling to him, you're giving him stuff, you're putting it on his donkey, and they're going to think that this guy is taking your stuff. And Amir L'Nachri is Aser. Telling a guy to do something on Shabbat that you're not allowed to do is Aser. So, therefore, you cannot do this with the guy. So this case is not about your kalim working, but this is more like, Marat Ayin. You don't want them to think about Amir L'Nachri. But if he's going to get home quickly, and he's going to get home possibly before Shabbat, so the Shabbat says it will be permissible. Uvet Hillel matirim. It doesn't matter. Listen, the guy is coming to buy from your store, you're loading his donkey. Who cares? Let him take his stuff and go. It's not my stuff. Bet Shammai Omrim, Eno Tinin Orot La'abdan. We may not give hides to the guy, tanner, v'lo kelim l'chabos nochri, and not clothing to the Gaishet launderer or dry cleaner, Ele Kadesh Yasu Mib'od Yom, unless there is time for it to be done while it gets still day. As long as you give it to them early Friday, that they can possibly do it on Friday, then you can give it to them. But if you give it to them right before Shabbat, according to Bet Shammai, you cannot do that. Now, according to Bet Shammai, what happens if I give it early Friday and the guy works on it on Shabbat? So, according to Bet Shammai, that's not a problem. I didn't tell him to work on Shabbat. We have the principle of kablanut, which is basically I'm telling the guy, do the job whenever, right? Don't do it on Shabbat, do it whenever. And the guy chooses to do it on Shabbat. I didn't tell him to do it on Shabbat, and that's fine. Now, what about your kalim resting? Your beged is a keli. I thought the kalim have to rest, according to Bet Shammai. Yeah, the kalim have to rest, but it means that it can't do work. The kalim should not be doing work, but work can be done to it, right? So the dry cleaner can fix your shirt on Shabbat. In this case, of Bet Shammai, if you gave it in early, and Bet Hillel allows you even to give it to the dry cleaner right before Shabbat, because what's it called? I'm not doing anything. I'm giving it to him, and he can choose whenever to do it. It's all kablanut. I'm giving it to him, and you can do it whenever. The poskim say, what about a case, even according to Bet Hillel? What about a case? A guy walks into the dry cleaner right before Shabbat and says, here's my shirt. I need it Sunday morning. So he's not really giving the guy much time to do it. Okay? Or he says, I need it Motzei Shabbat. Right? Make the case even worse. So he's definitely going to do it on Shabbat. So in such a case, there are poskim will say, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to give it in on Friday and say, oh, I need it Sunday morning, or I need it Motzei Shabbat, because then you're really giving it to the guy to do on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do that. But if I gave it to the guy right before Shabbat, and I just gave it to him, well, he'll do whenever he wants to do it. That's his problem, not mine. That would be fine, according to Beit Hillel. Ufchulan Beit Hillel matirim im hashemesh. In all these cases, Beit Hillel allows it as long as the sun is up, as long as it's Friday, as long as it's not yet Shabbat. You can do these things. Now, interesting. I'm sure Gamliel, they were from the house of Beit Hillel, right? The house of Hillel, and yet, what did they do? They took a chumrah on them. Nohagin hayu Beit Abba, the father of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, so Gamliel, shenotnim kili lavan lechabos nochri, when he would give a white clothing to the launderer, to the dry cleaner, and the white clothing took longer to clean. To get it back to white. So shlosha yamim kodem Shabbat. He would give it 3 days before Shabbat. This way, they definitely didn't work on it on Shabbat. V'shav and elu ve'elu. Now, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree. Sheto'anin korat Beit Habad ve'igulei hagat. We may place beams of the olive press and the circular planks of the wine press. What's going on over here? So, what's it? First of all, interesting. Beit Shammai allows you to put beams over pressed grapes and pressed olives. The point is to continue to extract them. Why is Beit Shammai letting that? He says your kalim have to have shvitat kelim. They have to rest. So how is he saying that you can? What's it called? Yeah, how is he saying you could just put it on top of these stuff? So we have to understand. Beit Shammai says shvitat kelim is true, but only when it's a malacha deoraita that's going to come out of it. When it's a malacha deoraita, when it's a biblical prohibition. Here, he's putting beams on once crushed grapes and once pressed olives. What do we mean by that? What is the malacha of squeezing a grape, and what's the malacha of squeezing an olive? The malacha is known as schita. Schita is squeezing, which is a tolda of the malacha of dash. Dash is extracting, taking out from something inside. So dash, biblically, on a d'oraita level, dash is only the first squeeze. When you start the extraction, that's the malacha of dash. The continuation of squeezing, that's not anymore d'oraita. That's the rabbanan dash. So here we're dealing already with olives that have been pressed. We're dealing already with grapes that have been pressed. So what you're dealing with is once pressed olives and grapes. There's no more malacha d'oraita of dash. As such, there's no shvitat kelim tzarech. There's no need of shvitat kelim when it's not doing a malacha d'oraita, and therefore even Beit Shammai allows you to put the beams on top of this once crushed olives and or grapes. Now, we finished the Mishnah, and now we're going to start the Gemara. Today we're going to be dealing with two topics in the Gemara. The first topic we're going to deal with is a short and brief topic, but a very, very important topic. This is going back to the malacha of lush. Lush is kneading. Okay, so the question the Gemara is going to deal with is the Gemara's question is, who is the author of our Mishnah? Who does it go with? Why? Because when it comes to lush, there's apparently a machloket. There's a machloket Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi, and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi. What's the machloket? The question is the definition of lush. When is it considered needed? According to Rabbi, we're going to see it becomes lush when water and the substance that we're mixing it with, so let's say flour in a normal case, water and flour come together. That is the start of lush. That's the malacha of lush. According to Rabbi Yehuda, water and flour comes together. That's not the d'oraita malacha of lush. The d'oraita malacha of lush only happens when the person starts to manually knead the dough. That's when it happens. So our case in our Mishnah said that you put the ink, you put the dye substance and the vetch, you put it in the pot, you put the water. So you have to make sure that it's done before Shabbat, Beit Shammai says. It all says putting the water. It doesn't say about actually kneading it manually. So who is the halacha like? Going to be like Rebbe. That's what we're coming out with. So let's see. Who is the opinion that when you put water, that is already considered soaking and that's already considered kneading? Amad Rav Yosef, Rabbihi. This is Rebbe. The Tanya. Echad noten et hakemach ve'echad noten et hamayim. Ha'acharon hayav. You put flour, you put water. Whoever put the last substance, whether it's the water or the flour, he's hayav because that's lush. Lush is when it's mixed together. You don't have to actually knead it. Once it starts becoming a substance, that's the malacha of lush. Divrei Rebbe. Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Enu hayav ad sheyigabel. He's not hayav until he manually moves it. So looks like our Mishnah is like Rebbe. Amar le Abaye. Abaye said, "V'dilma ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yossi ela bekemach davar gibulhu, aval tayod alav bar gibulhu ema lechayev." Says over here, maybe Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, maybe our Mishnah is even like Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. When does Rabbi Yosef Yehuda say you have to actually do it physically, manually need it? That is when the item requires physical kneading in order to make it a good one substance, like dough, right? You took flour and water, you just leave it there. Yeah, it's going to start doing stuff, but it's not going to come into a dough until you actually knead it. So that's where you need to knead it, and that's when the malach of lush is. But an item like the ink, and the item like the vetch, and the item like the dye, there you don't need to manually knead it. Once you put the water with it, it starts already its business and becomes to one big substance. So you already have lush over there. So maybe who says it depends what type of substance I'm dealing with. If it's a bar gibel, it requires manual folding, then yeah, you need the manual fold. But when it's not kneadable, then it's not. So then you don't need it. And the Gemara says, "Lo yisal kidatach." The Rashi says, "Do not think like that." The Tanya, "Echad noitin et ha'efer, the echad noitin et hamayim, ha'achron chayiv." When you mix water with ashes, the last one, whoever puts in the last ingredient is chayiv. Now, ashes, you don't need to knead. There's no what are you needing? What are you physically needing in ashes? You see, you need to do physical. According to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, it seems you always need to do a physical kneading in order for it to be considered lush, even in a case like ashes where it doesn't even need physical kneading. Gemara says no, maybe not true, but Dilma my efer. But perhaps what does the Braita mean by efer? Maybe instead of meaning ashes, it means afar. It means earth. Earth is kneadable. Davar gibulhu. Earth, you knead it with water, and you make pots and pans and all sorts of things from it. But Dilma my efer, afar davar gibulhu. V'hatanya. Efer, v'hatanya afar. We have a Braita that says efer, and a Braita that says afar. Mide gabe hadade tanya. Were both these Braitot taught separately, that you're thinking to say that even when ashes, you need to actually do it with folding? No, these both Braitot are not taught separately. They were taught by Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshea. And therefore, they're really saying about the same afar. Just someone calls afar efer. It's interchangeable, ashes and earth. So people would use it. But there's no proof from here that Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says that you always need to do manual kneading. Perhaps all what you need is when a substance that's lava bar gibelhu. Maybe all that you need is the fact that the water hits the substance and it starts to work. Now, just to mention on the outside, lush is a malacha that's applicable on Shabbat. You have to be very careful. For example, a person wants to make baby cereal. You take the powder, right? The rice, the oatmeal, whatever it is, and you put it into water, and it becomes a substance. That's lush. So how does a person do that? So you have to make it a derabanan, and you have to make a shinui in the derabanan, and then it's allowed to do. So first of all, how is it a derabanan? So according to Shulchan Aruch, number one, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Halacha is Rabbi Yehuda that it's only considered the bar gibel. It's only considered a lush is when you need it physically. You do a manual knead. That's considered a lush. And just mixing the water with the thing, that's a derabanan. Okay, but the cereal you have to mix it. So what happens? So it turns out that perhaps when something is a lav bar gibelhu, when it's not something that's made into a dough, cereal doesn't become into a dough. It's not a dough. You're not baking. You're not making. It's not dough. It's just becoming a one substance. So that is the derabanan. Lav bar gibel is the derabanan. Okay, and if it's derabanan, now I can do shinui. And if I have a shinui, according to Ashkenazim, two shinui, one shinui. So what they do, and what else you can do is you can put a lot of water, make it more watery than the weak. It's more watery. Now it's not going to be a dough-like substance. It's more watery. So therefore, it's not lush. Lush is when it becomes one big, thickish type of substance. If it's watery, it's not lush. Also, they put it in backwards. Whatever I do during the week, I put the cereal in the water. I put the water in the cereal. So I do a shinoi there. Then when I mix it, I'm mixing it with the back of the spoon. I'm mixing it, and instead of stirring it like normally, I do it in a crisscross motion. There are different shinuim that a person can do. What about mashing bananas, for example? Mashing a banana. I mash the banana. The liquid of the banana comes in there, and then it becomes like a substance over there. Mashed bananas. Is that lush? Perhaps the fruit juice itself, its own fruit juice, is not going to make it like a water to make it lush. So perhaps that's okay as well. But there are malachot of lush. We have a couple of shirim online on lush. Anyone wants to take a look further over there. Let's get back into our Gemara. So we finished the first understanding. Now we're going to come to our other thing. Now we want to know the parameters of Shvitat Kelim. We're going to bring it down to Braita that seems to be, at the beginning, it seems to be going like Beit Hillel. It's going to turn out in the end that this Braita is actually like Beit Shammai. So let's see how this happens. Tanu Rabbanan. Potkin Mayim Lagina Erev Shabbat Mchashecha. I can open the water channel, or for example, the hose, before Shabbat, and let the hose water my garden the entire Shabbat. And it's going the entire day completely. I'm allowed to do that. And I can place incense, this perfume, and I put it on fire, and then it smokes into my clothing. I can do that on Erev Shabbat, and the whole Shabbat I can go. And I can put sulfur underneath the vessels, and the fume of the sulfur will go up. I believe they have to burn it, the sulfur. And the point of this is that silver had etchings and engravings on them. And it was hard to see because silver is light and the etching is thin. So you don't see it. In order to do it, in order to see it, they would they would put sulfur, fumes of the sulfur, it would darken the silver, and then it would clean the silver again. But the etches, the edgings, the drawings, the engravings would keep the darkness. And now you'll be able to see it. So I could do that sulfur business the entire Shabbat, sorry for Shabbat, and let the silver just be under there, be on top of it, and get it. Next, I can put the special medicine cream on the eye. Or dressing on the wound. And the whole day I get medicine, even though you're not allowed to use medicine on Shabbat if it's not a pikuach nefesh. And yet in this case I'm allowed to put it before Erev Shabbat and let it go, and that's fine. So, but you're not allowed to put wheat into the watermill. You're not allowed to put wheat into the watermill unless it would be finished before Shabbat. Now, why not? Wait a second. Everything else you're allowed to do from before Shabbat. This you're not allowed to do from Shabbat. What's going on over here? So my kama, the Amar Rabba, bipnei shemashma'at kol, because it makes noise. Because it makes noise. So it's not because of Shvitat Kelim, but because it makes noise. And making noise is Zilzul Shabbat. It ruins Shabbat. Okay? Now this making noise actually plays a role in halakha, according to the Rama. For example, we know the halakha is like Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel you allows your stuff to do work on Shabbat. So you're allowed to, for example, go to your washing machine or your dryer, whichever one it is, and Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat, throw the stuff inside and set it to go. And that would be allowed because there is no Shvitat Kelim. But according to Ashkenazim, they don't allow this unless it's a tzarech gadol, unless it's very important, it really needed to get done. Why? Because the washing machine, the dryer, makes a lot of noise. and a lot of noise takes away from the Shabbat. Is the Zul Shabbat? The Shulchan Aruch doesn't learn that way. Shulchan Aruch says, based on what we're going to see now, that this is only a havamina. This is only a thought right now. It's not the final understanding of this braita. So since it's not the final understanding, it's not the halacha. Says that's the way Shulchan Aruch learns. The Rama says no, we have to be careful of this, and therefore he doesn't allow it unless it's absolutely necessary. So right now we're learning this whole braita like Bet Hillel. Now, Amaleh Rav Yosef says, 1 second. Why don't we say you cannot put the wheat into the mill because of Shvitat Kelim? Amaleh Rav Yosef. Maybe it's because of Shvitat Kelim. You have to let your utensils rest. The Tanya, it says, everything I told you, you have to take heed, you have to pay attention to, which comes right after the psukim about keeping Shabbat. And the word uchol means call, everything. Also, could sound like kelim. And we learned from here that kelim need to rest. L'rabot shvitat kelim. And it's what? It's a deoraita shvitat kelim. The reason why you cannot put wheat into the watermill is because of shvitat kelim. Oh, 1 second. Now that you're saying that it's because of shvitat kelim, levet hillel etlu shvitat kelim deoraita. Then he has to hold a shvitat kelim also is deoraita. So gofit umigmar. How do we have it that sulfur and spices you can burn them and let them go on the kelim? How could that be? I thought you need shvitat kelim. And you're saying this whole braita is like Beit Hillel, but how? How is he allowing these things if you need your kelim to rest? Maybe, says the Gemara, Mishum de lo kavid ma'aseh. 1 second. What is this pot doing? His pot's just sitting still. The activity is going on inside the pot. The fire is burning there. The sulfur is fuming there. But the pot's not doing anything. 1 second. But when you put the pishtan, the flax, into the oven is keeping the heat inside. It's doing something. No, it's not doing anything active. It's just sitting there. The oven is the oven. So therefore, it is shvitat kelim, even though it's going on inside of it. What about the traps? The traps are moving. The net moves. This moves. My tamasharum. Why would you allow it? We're dealing with fish hooks and basket traps that have one side open very big and the other side very small. So the fish goes in through the big side, can't come out through the small side and get stuck. Or a hook which is stationary, has the bait on it and it comes on there. So it's not movable. So right now, Rav Yosef is trying to understand this braita as Bet Hillel. And he's saying it's like Bet Hillel. And what Shvitat Kelim, according to Bet Hillel, is that my Kelim don't actively move. They're not actually doing something. They're just passive. And that would be okay. And by the watermill, the mill is actively moving. And that's the problem. That's the problem. That's the way he's learning it right now. But Vahash Amravasi, so Oshaya, he says in the name of Asi, Mantana Shvitat Kelim Doraita. 1 second. Who is the opinion that Shvitat Kelim is Doraita? Bet Shammai, he below Bet Hillel. It's Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel never said that Shvitat Kelim is Doraita. Levet Shammai, Ken Kavid Maseh, Ben Lo Kavid Maseh Asur. And when Bet Shammai says Shvitat Kelim, it's not if only the Kelim are moving around that it's after. No, the Kelim cannot be participatory in the Maaseh at all, whether it's stationary, whether it's nothing. Ben Kavid Maseh, Ben Lo Kavid Maseh Asur. The Bet Hillel, according to Bet Hillel, there is no Shvitat Kelim. There is no din of Shvitat Kelim. And therefore, Abba got the Kavid Maseh Shari. Even if it's doing work, even if it's jumping around, it's allowed. It is permitted to allow one's utensils to do work on Shabbat, even though it performs an action. So now, Bahashta da'amart lebet Shammai, afagav the lo avid ma'aseh asur. Now, this braita is going according to Bet Shammai, because according to Bet Hillel, I'm allowed the watermill to do stuff. As long as I put the wheat there before Shabbat, the mill can continue to go the entire Shabbat. And I'm not worried about the noise, says the Shulchan Aruch. Right? Siman 252. Chaim, Sifhei says, Let the noise go. We don't care about it. Ramah is worried about the noise, but we're not worried about it. And let it go. Now, according to Bet Shammai, you cannot do it even if your pot or pans are not moving around; they're just sitting still. It's looking to be participatory in the maaseh. If that's the case, mugmar v'gofrit ma'tama shalu Bet Shammai. Why did they let how could Bet Shammai say in that Braita that you can have the fire going and the perfume going into the clothing, fire going and the sulfur going into the silver? How's that? No. Hata manaha ara. There is no kalim involved. It is on the ground. It's in the ground. The fire is on the ground. It's not in a keli. That's fine. Your kalim are resting. 1 second. Gigit, venir, uktera, ishaput, ma'tamash Bet Shammai. On Shabbat, you have the barrel. The barrel is the beer barrel. They would soak barley for 8 days, including Shabbat. How are you soaking it on Shabbat? Your kalim are doing work. A lamp. How do you have a candle burning on Shabbat in a candlestick? It's your kalim doing work. Your kalim is having work on it. Havara, havara. K'deira, your pot. How's it sitting on the oven? V'shapud, and the spit that you put the korban pesach. How are you allowing them to be on Shabbat? They're doing things. Malach is involved over here, and you said your kalim can't even do it, even when it's not active. It's just passive. According to Bet Shammai, how do you have candles on Shabbat? How do you have anything? Oh, you know how? The mafkir lahu afkure, because he's being mafkir his kalim. He's saying the kalim is not mine. He makes hefker. He says it's hefker. So then it's not his kalim that are doing the work. So there's no shvitat kalim. So someone wanted to say on Shabbat, what kind of game is this? It's in his house. It's protected. Is this and that? How is it not his? So some want to say, some shouldn't want to say that it's hefker betin hefker. He's not making it hefker. Betin, according to Bet Shammai, betin makes everybody's stuff they're using for Shabbat hefker, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to use it because you have shvitat kelim. The way we paskin is like Beit Hillel, and there is no shvitat kelim. And that's why your candlesticks and your pot and everything else, all the kelim, there's no such thing as shvitat kelim. And they can be, whether actively or non-actively, passively, malacha can be going on with them. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, there was the question that came out regarding the robot vacuum, right? So the robot vacuum is running around on Shabbat. Can I have that on Shabbat? So I asked this question. To two poskim. One posek said not correct. You should not do that. And another posek said it's not proper. Okay, so they want to say, based on the Ramah, that it is zilzul Shabbat. That the zilzul Shabbat. That the making noise, it's going around, taking away from the avir of Shabbat. But perhaps one can say, from the shvitat kelim standpoint, there's no your kelim don't have to have shvitat kelim. And in addition, according to Shulchan Aruch, I don't care if it makes noise. So even if it makes noise, we shouldn't be worried about it. So perhaps according to the way we learned, you can be matter robot vacuums to be on its own doing work on Shabbat. Again, I don't think you see it, and I think the poskim are going to be a little bit refrained from doing it. But if you did see someone doing it, the Maaseh, he's not wrong. You have no issue with shvitat kelim, and we're not worried about the kol. We're not worried about the zilzul Shabbat from that. Again, even though I'm leaning to that side, I wouldn't do it myself. I like to have Shabbat like it always was, and without new inventions to recreate Shabbat. And therefore, I think that's why the poskim that I asked said it's not proper, it's not correct, it's not the right thing to do. But on a technical standpoint, it's technically permissible. All right, one more sugya as we finish up today's sugya. Let's take a look. Now, man tana laha the tanu rabbanan. Who is the tana that taught this braita. A woman may not fill a pot with asisot and turmasin. These are types of beans that require extensive cooking. The beans require more than 24 hours of cooking. And here, they wanted to put it before Shabbat, so they'll be ready to eat after Shabbat. Don't do it. And if you did, and if you did, then you cannot use it after Shabbat. You have to wait until the process, the time, whether it's 24 hours, or whatever time it took to do it on Shabbat, for after Shabbat, in order for you to start to use it. Now, who's that opinion? If you cannot use your oven to do something, that's Bet Shammai. Shvitat Kelim, right? Seemingly. Next, Lo Yimaleh Nachtum Habit Shalmayim. The baker will not fill a barrel of water, and leave it inside the oven right before Shabbat, and then it should be hot and ready after Shabbat because you need hot water to do their kneading and to do their doughs and stuff like that. And if they do that, they have to wait until after Motzei Shabbat, after the extra time that it would have taken to do it if they just started after Motzei Shabbat. Who is this? This has to be Bet Shammai and not Bet Hillel, because Bet Shammai says that my stuff has to rest, right? And Bet Hillel doesn't say that. No, says the Gemara. I feel Tema Bet Hillel, even Bet Hillel. Why? Because here it's a whole different situation. There's another factor. The factor of I might come to stoke the coals. I might come to stoke the coals. I want it to cook better. I want it to be warmer, the water. And so I might come and stoke the coals. And when you're stoking the coals, you're doing havara. You're making the fire bigger. That's the malacha de oraita. So the gezerah, don't stoke the coals. Now, ihachi, if that's the case, we worry about the coals. Mugmar we go fitna milixor. When I'm using the perfume and I'm making it on fire and going into the clothing, when I'm using the sulfur and it's on fire and it's going into the silver, there's a fire there also. So am I not worried that I'm going to stoke the coals? Umar says, no, you're not going to be worried about that. Because if you're going to stoke the coals, the fire is going to become too strong to this, to that, and it's going to ruin the silver and it's going to ruin the clothing. So therefore, when it comes to that process, you never touch it. You don't touch it. You leave it as is. 1 second, if that's true. So what about the flax in the oven? There's coals in there. I might open it and I might touch the coals. Umar says, no. Because the people will not open it up. Why? Because if you're going to open the oven, though during the process of the bleaching of the flax, it's going to ruin it forever. And therefore, people will not open it and they would not touch the oven, and therefore we have no problem with the coals. Temer la yora ligzor. Let them also issue a decree in the case of wool placed into the vat. Right? The wool is into the dyer's vat where you're trying the dye to go in, and there's a fire on there. There's a fire on the pot. It's a stove. Okay, and it's not going to get ruined if I stoke the coals. It's when it's removed. It's no longer on the fire. It's still hot, but it's removed from the fire. Then I'm allowed to keep it over Shabbat that way. Maybe a guy will come to stir it, and you're not allowed to stir something that's hot if it's not completely cooked yet, because you're helping the process along. So Gemara says, the case here is that that is off the fire and it's sealed, so there's no case of it coming to what's it called? Then you come to touch the fire, and therefore that's why it was permissible in those cases. So even though Shvitat Kelim is allowed, you still have to make sure that there is no chance of the stoking the coals or coming to some malacha that would be asur on Shabbat. Now, just briefly, we talked a little bit about Bishul over here, and Shema Yihate Begihalim, he might touch the coals. Therefore, we have something called Garif V'Kotum, right? Is where we have to make some distinction with our fire. We have to make a distinction with our fire when it comes to Shabbat. That's why everyone's familiar with the blech or the plata, right? We don't use a regular fire. If you're using the fire on the stovetop, we cover it with what we call in Yiddish a blech, which is basically a metal sheet, right, that you put over the fire, and this is covering the fire, and this is supposed to be a reminder and help us not to come and actually touch the knobs. In fact, there's Shlomo Zalman, I believe there's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who said that it's not enough just to put a cover over the fire. You should actually have a cover over the knobs. And you'll see some of the blechs are actually sold with a part going down, right? The part going down is meant to cover the knobs. And some people can say it's actually enough if you just cover the knobs. You don't need to cover the actual fire, because the issue is stoking the coals. I'm not going to touch the fire, right? Just stoke the coals. It seems to be the minig olam is to make sure the fire is covered. And there are some who cover the knobs as well. I have not really seen people just covering the knobs. But usually people do cover the fire. That's the gar for cotton, which would be sweeping away the coals and covering it to make it clear that it is not the same fire as a regular fire, so I won't come to possibly stoke it on Shabbat. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue from here next time. Shei Koach leKulam.